Well, we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and we will be, hopefully, if I can get through the whole chapter, concluding his section on Christian freedom and liberty. Between chapter 8 and chapter 10, that's what he's been covering, is as Christians, what is our freedom and what is our liberty to do. Tonight, in preparation of our Bible study, he's going to give us a history lesson of our history and actually of the Jewish history to give an illustration talking about Christian freedom. We talked last week about how we use our Christian freedom, that although we are free to do anything, we have the liberty, we have to keep it in focus of not being a stumbling block, first of all, to ourselves, but then a stumbling block to others, the weaker believers as well. And we mentioned that last week, talking about food being sacrificed to idols. And he's actually going to hint back at this in chapter 10. He also gave us an illustration of holding ourselves up in our freedom, that we would not defile ourselves, but then also in our actions we wouldn't defile others. Even though we can do what we are free to do, that doesn't mean that we ought to. And he'll cover this in more depth in chapter 10. As we cover this issue and the topics of gray areas like we did last week, that personal convictions, it's a touchy one. And so don't take my word for it. You can go back to the scriptures, you pray through on it, and you pray through in your gray areas, your personal convictions, and you let God lead you. But I want to remind us as we do of the definition of what freedom really is. In our nation today, we have a terrible definition of freedom, that freedom or liberty is the ability to do what we want. And that's not what freedom is. Freedom is the ability to do as we ought. It gives us the opportunity to, and then we are responsible for our decisions. For example, in that same idea, if I were to have you over for dinner, I would be free to make the choice of what meat to have. Now that's a freedom, that I have that choice. But having you for dinner is a whole nother discussion, right? Your rights begin where mine end, and mine end where yours begin. Although I have the free right to cook whatever meat I want at my house, that doesn't mean you get to be on the menu. We have freedom, but it's the freedom to do as we ought, not to do what we want. I hope that makes sense. Now, maybe not as graphically, Paul gives us the same illustration when he's talking about the children of Israel as they're wandering around in the wilderness. He goes all the way back to the Exodus, and he talks about how they abused their liberty that God gave them from slavery. And that we are not to follow them, but we are to learn from them and learn from their mistakes. So let's begin. Chapter 10, verse 1. Now I don't want you to be ignorant, brothers. Oh, by the way, it's something really cute. I didn't really know this, but one of the commentators brought it out. In the Greek, there aren't punctuation marks, like commas. And so you could say, now I don't want you to be ignorant brothers. But that's not what that was intended. He doesn't want them to be ignorant, not just ignorant brothers. Of the fact that all of our ancestors who left Egypt were under the cloud. They all went through the sea, and they were all immersed into Moses in the cloud in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that went with them. That rock was the Messiah. Now notice remember this is Corinth that he's writing to. And he says that all our ancestors. What he's doing is, you remember how Jesus talked to the Pharisees about who Abraham's seed really was? And Jesus said, no, you're not Abraham's seed, you're Satan's seed. And Jesus made the connection that Abraham has children that, although they're not physical children, they're spiritual children. And this is the connection Paul is making. Even though we may be Gentiles, our heritage is still in the Old Testament with the children of Israel. Spiritually speaking, we fall in line with them. And this is what he's saying. They went, all of them, into Egypt from Egypt under a cloud. And so he goes down a list of everything that all of them had together. They were given liberation from slavery. They were given directions for their travels by the cloud. They were separated from their enemies by the cloud. They were protected by a wall from danger on multiple occasions. They were also given provision for survival, whether it be manna or quail in the food or water to drink. But then they also, notice that at the very end of verse 3, he mentions this spiritual rock that went with them, and then he clarifies and says this rock was the Messiah. Now, I don't know, it's probably been 6 or so months ago that I actually preached on this, so I'm not going to go into great detail. But what they also had, it wasn't like God said, okay, I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to give you all the provisions that you need, and then let them go. Not at all. He went with them. That's a big difference. It's one thing to have everything you need. It's a whole nother thing to have the general go with you. It's one thing to have everything provided for. It's a whole nother thing to have the bodyguard standing next to you when you have it. Especially when you have enemies that are wanting to wipe you out every few months. So they also had the intervention by God himself in their midst. So they had everything. God releases them from Egypt and provides everything, including his very presence with them. And then verse 5. But God wasn't pleased with most of those people. So they were struck down in the wilderness. Now their experiences serve as examples for us so that we won't set our hearts on evil as they did. They had freedom from slavery. They had liberty. God gave it to them. And then they misused it and they lost it. Warning to church today. They had it and they lost it because they used it wrong. They stand as an example to us. They had everything they needed that to accomplish the task, to be given the possession that God wanted for them. They had all the opportunity, everything they needed. But they still missed it, all but 2 of them. And we're talking about millions of people being scattered in the desert. All but 2. They stand as a warning to us. All of them could have had it, but only 2 of them actually accomplished it. Foolish people repeat the mistakes of others by not learning from them. It will be nearly impossible for me to become a drug addict because I saw what it did to my friends that I worked with. And I'm not going to need to repeat the actions that they did. Their actions were far enough for me. I learned. If the children of Israel are examples to us to learn by, why did only 2 of them make it in? What can we learn from their victories and their defeats? Well, Paul goes on, and he explains that. Verse 7. Let's stop being idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to play. Paul says a bunch of them were idolaters. Idolatry is when you put anything, something, anything, more important place in your life than God. And that could be pretty much anything. He said some of them were idolaters. They were lazy. Some of them put food above their freedom from slavery. Remember, they were asking, man, we really missed the leeks and the onions that we had in Egypt. They forgot about the chains and the whips and the work. And they put that more important. I digress, okay? Better be careful about talking about food, right? Some of them put their thirst above trusting God. They asked, what? Did God bring us out into the wilderness to die of thirst? They're thirsty, and because of it, they distrusted God. Can you imagine putting your thirst above God? And yet that's what they did. And some of them wanted to play around like the Egyptian worshipers did. And you remember what happened when Moses is up on the mountain receiving the law from God. They decided to play. So Aaron asks for the gold, and then his response, oh my goodness. If I was Moses, I'd have probably slapped him. I took all the gold that everybody gave me, I threw it in the fire, and poof, out popped this big old golden calf. What a miracle. Now, Moses ground it into powder and made him drink it, but I'd have tried to pick it up and slap him with it, I think. They went and they wanted to play like they did back in Egypt in worship. And that was real bad. Verse 8, he leads along that same line in the last part to play, let's stop sinning sexually, as some of them were doing. And on a single day, 23,000 fell dead. How do we keep ourselves from missing out on God's glory? We got to keep ourselves sexually pure. This is how Balak finally won against Israel. Remember, he hired Balaam? He hired Balaam to go up on the mountain and look down at the children of Israel and curse them. And every time Balaam went to open his mouth, God put a blessing in it instead of a curse. But so that he could still get paid before he left, he said, Balak, I got what you need to do. You just need to go take your worship and take the ladies that worship there and just go set them next to your people, next to the children of Israel. And then once the children of Israel see the worship and see how much fun that's going on, they'll fall. You won't need to curse them. God will curse them. He was right. That's exactly what happened. And God wiped them out. Lots of them died. I think it was the tribe of Simeon lost half their population in that day. One day. Some of them were sexually immoral. And man, for our nation today, for our church, people, we need to pay attention. If we can learn something from them, we need to learn that. Some of them are idolaters. Verse 9. Stop putting the Lord to the test, as some of them were doing, and were destroyed by snakes. You must stop complaining, as some of them were doing, and were annihilated by the destroyer. So some of them were idolaters and were destroyed. I love his wording of this. I mean, it's almost as if Paul came over to the hills of eastern Kentucky and went to a couple church services, right? They were putting God to the test, and what happened? They got bit by snakes and died. Well, if you just had enough faith, that snake might have bit you, but you wouldn't have got poisoned. Too bad most of the guys that brought the snakes to church, they ended up dying anyway from it, right? It's almost as if he'd have read it right out of Eastern Hills. I don't know. But they were putting the Lord to the test. They were also complaining. They were never satisfied with what God gave them, whether it was with the manna, whether it was with the water, whether it was with the heat, whether it was with the quail, whether it was with their worship, whether it was with God being too loud from on top of the mountain. There was always complainers. We often think that it's cute and maybe not that big a deal when we see it in our fellow Christians. But God struck people dead for it back there. And let's be honest, there's a whole lot of churches that have died because of it too. It's important to be thankful for what God has given us and just accept it. How many people go in and out of churches because they're never happy? They're always complaining, well, there's this or there's that or there's this other thing, and they never get stable. Man, can you imagine standing on Judgment Day for that one? Well, I gave you everything. Gave you all the opportunities. Gave you everything you needed to be walking through these pearly gates. But it wasn't good enough for you. You needed something else. Verse 11. These things happened to them to serve as an example. And they were written down as a warning for us, in whom the culmination of the ages have been attained. The Old Testament is just as relevant for us New Testament believers as it was for the Old Testament ones. We study the Old Testament victories and failures like the children of Israel wandering around the wilderness, so we don't make the same mistakes that they do or did. The Old Testament and the New Testament are one book. Just because the Old Testament was written before Christ and the New Testament was written in the year of our Lord doesn't make it any less God's Word completely. And we need to hold to it that way. The New Testament is just as relevant as the Old, and the Old is just as relevant as the New. There's whole church denominations that, well, the Old Testament's just old and it doesn't apply anymore. We're in the New Age. We're in the new... No. It's like taking a mystery book and just cutting out half the book and reading the ending. Well, you don't know who did it. You don't know why they did it. You don't know how they got found out. Or the other way around, you rip out the end of the book and you find out somebody got murdered and somebody found out why, but you don't ever know who actually did it. In our terms, if you cut the New Testament out, you don't realize that the person that's been doing all of this stuff in the Old Testament is Jesus Christ himself, and he's going to return to receive his bride. If you cut the Old Testament out, you just see this man, and you don't know why he's doing it or how he's doing it or what he's going to do for it. You can't cut out either side. Verse 12. Therefore, because of all the mistakes that they made, because of their idolatry, because of their complaining, all of that, therefore, whoever thinks he is standing secure should watch out so he doesn't fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is unusual for human beings, but God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond your strength. Instead, along with the temptation, he will provide a way out so that you may be able to endure it. And so, my dear friends, keep on running away from idolatry. I'm talking to sensible people. Apply what I'm saying to yourselves. Verse 12 said, therefore, whoever thinks he is standing securely should watch out so he doesn't fall. Our pride will be our destruction, Proverbs says. And I don't know how many times I've said it, and I'll say it again. I'm fine is the most terrible thing you could believe or say about yourself, because none of us are fine. Satan's goal is not usually to attack with an overwhelming force and siege your castle, like he did in Lord of the Rings. No, he sends in the spies. The church at Sardis that we have in 7 letters to 7 churches. Sardis was this massive, it was a massive city with massive walls on top of a massive hill it had one way in. And so they had all of their troops there, and that was it. Well, in the battle, when it goes to get destroyed, the general says, I will reward handsomely anyone that can get me a path up that mountain. Well, as the soldiers are watching, they see one of the soldiers drop his helmet off the walls from the city itself. And he also watches as that soldier comes down, climbs down from the wall, follows a path, and picks up his helmet and goes back up. That very same night, that man, awarded by the general, got a troop of soldiers, and they climbed up unguarded and took the city practically without a battle. That's how Satan works. He comes when you think everything is nice and peaceful and quiet, and he sends in a spy, and usually it's somebody close to you. And he throws the temptation. He sets the trap out that you'll trip and fall, that you'll be caught. We need to be aware that our temptations are a trap to be avoided. And the only way they are avoided is when we're looking for them. You know, you see the old war movies and maybe Vietnam where they've got the wire spread across with the grenades. And it's always somebody that misses one of those wires because they're not looking. That's temptation. Verse 13. We got to be careful of them, but then he says, no temptation has overtaken you that is unusual for human beings. Guess what? You've got it. Somebody else has had it too. But God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond your strength. Instead, along with the temptation, he will also provide a way out so that you will be able to endure it. You don't have to fail to temptation. When you were saved, you were given the power over all temptation. Period. You don't have to fall to it. Now, if you do, that's because you weren't looking for the exit. Verse 14. And so, my dear friends, keep on running from idolatry. I've heard a lot of people tell me, oh, Pastor, I wish I could defeat temptation, but they're just too great for me. It's not true. We'd love to believe it, because then we'd have an excuse for why we do it. But often what's happened? It's that we've been wandering so far in the field of danger that when the bull does come to get us, we can't cross back over the fence line for safety because we're too far in. That's what usually happens. The further we stay from that danger field, the more safe we're going to become. Y'all remember that in Pilgrim's Progress? They just topped that little fence because it looked nice to walk down. And boy, did it get them in a mess of trouble. That's what temptation does. The further into danger we put ourselves, the more likely it is that we are going to fail. Well, yeah, for example, I probably won't get mugged on the streets of Chicago or Detroit. It won't happen. You know why? Because every time I'm going north, I avoid those two cities like the plague. And I live in eastern Kentucky. My grandparents lived in Chicago. They lived in Hammond, Indiana, which is just on the outskirts. That's a bad place to live. If you don't want to get mugged there, guess what? Move somewhere else. Eastern Kentucky's pretty good. It's a long ways. If there's going to be a mugger that wants you, they got to drive a long way to find you. Keep that way with temptation too. Stay as safe as you can. My granddad always said, it's a poor set of legs that let a man get beat. Poor set of legs that let a man get beat in temptation too. Even Joseph ran for his life on that one. Verse 15, I'm talking to sensible people. Apply what I'm saying to yourselves. I love it. You read the Bible, put it into practice. You see something good, add it to your life. You see something bad, don't put that in there. Sensible people do it. Why can't we? Pretty simple. Verse 16, the cup of blessing that we bless in our fellowship in the blood of the Messiah. Whoops, I'll try reading that right. The cup of blessing that we bless is our fellowship in the blood of the Messiah, isn't it? The bread that we break is our fellowship in the body of the Messiah, isn't it? Because there's one loaf. We who are many are one body, because all of us eat from the same loaf. He's going to talk about this more in detail in the next chapter, where he talks about the Last Supper, or what we would call communion. But they had the idea that you'd sit around the table and you'd take your one loaf of bread and you'd all break it off like what we do at communion. Well, that bread or that juice that you pour, or wine, whatever it was that they were drinking, whatever you poured into your cup from the whole, it nourished everybody at the table. Well, in that, because it was nourishing you and it's nourishing me and it's nourishing this person, all of us become one in that nourishment. And so what he's saying here is, we have the same cup of fellowship, the same koinonia. We have the same, which is the blood of Christ. We have the same bread, which is the body of Christ. That's what nourishes us, and that's what brings us together as a whole. Verse 18, look at the Israelis. From a human point of view, those who eat the sacrifices share in what is on the altar, don't they? Am I suggesting that an offering made from idols means anything, or that an idol itself is anything? Hardly. What they offer to demons and not to God, and I don't want you to become partners with demons. Remember, they were asking about, well, can we eat food that's sacrificed to idols? And he talks about it earlier. It's no big deal if you do, as long as it's not bringing another brother down. But then he clarifies and says, but listen, if they are sacrificing it to idols, they're sacrificing it to demons, principalities and powers. This is something serious, and I don't want you to be fed by that same food. If it's feeding them, if it's nourishing them, that's going to nourish you too. And we're not bringing the demons into our body as Christ. Make sense? You can follow the history of paganism, and it starts out in Babylon, and it moves to Egypt, and it moves to Greece, and it moves to Rome. And what you find is the stories are all very similar. The names are even similar. Their meanings are similar. The way they sacrifice is similar because it was all moving that same way. Every religion other than Christianity are worshiping demons. We don't like to talk about it much, but they are. They are worshiping the same things, doing the same sacrifices, and good heavens, we look at our nation right now and they may not realize it, but they are. The very practices that we are doing right now, and even some of the churches are claiming is okay, are the very same things that paganism did back then to worship these demons. And Paul says we're not to have any part of it. It's not to nourish us too. I know I've told you this story before, but when I was down in Cuba, met one of the Nazarene pastors, and her father sold her soul to the devil for him to have riches and power. And it worked. She was possessed by a demon, and I've told you that story before many times. But the power that Satan has in his realm was so strong that her dad one day was walking on the street. Somebody told him to get on the bus, and he got on the bus. He's riding along, doesn't even know where he's going. The bus driver stops, says, "This is your bus stop, get out." So he gets out, and he's standing there on the sidewalk, has no idea why. Sees this meat cutting shop right in front of him, and he says, well, I guess that's where I'm supposed to go. He goes inside, and we're talking about Cuba. They don't have much money. The person behind the cash register opens the cash register, pulls out a wad of bills this big, and hands it to him and says, okay, that's all you needed, you can go. If Satan and his minions can do that to nobodies in this world, what do you think he's doing with the powerful people and the rich people of this world? Folks, we are facing principalities and powers. It's not looking at one person's face or another person here or there. No, there's a power that's behind them doing things that are evil. That lady, the district superintendent, I heard it from his mouth telling the story of how he cast the demon out of her. And she still has scars to this day from the oppression of the demon. But she's freed. She's been saved, and it's a beautiful story. But there is power there that we need to be warned of. Verse 21. Now you can't drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You can't dine with the Lord and dine with demons, or you'll provoke the Lord to jealousy, won't you? Are we stronger than he is? What a question. Are we provoking the Lord to jealousy by making earthly things more important than him? We need to check our lives. The Israelites didn't, and they paid with theirs. There's two things that the Lord does with idols that we find from the Old Testament. First, he destroys them. Do you want God destroying your job, the relationship with your mate, maybe your TV, any number of things that you could be putting as an idol? Do you want God to destroy it? Because he will if that's what it takes. But the worse than destroying it is the second thing he does with it. He lets you keep it. And when he lets you keep the idol, he leaves because you're not listening anymore. And it's a worse place. If he at least destroys it, yeah, you're going to suffer loss, but hey, at least he's still speaking. But if he lets you have it and you can't hear what he's saying to you anymore, it's going to be a bad day on Judgment Day. Better to get rid of the idols now. Verse 23. Everything is permissible, but not everything is helpful. Everything is permissible, but not everything builds up. Here's where most people get lost. We have the freedom to do, but it says we ought. Is it helpful? Is it going to build us up? Now, most of us, that's as far as it goes. I'm going to do something in my life. Well, is it going to benefit me? Is it going to build me up? But that's not all Paul says here. He says, you also need to be thinking about your weaker brothers in the faith. Is what you're doing going to build them up? Is it going to be helpful to them? That's church on a whole nother level. That's a closer walk with the Lord than a lot of people have. Look what he says, verse 24. No one should seek his own welfare. Well, it's my benefit, whatever. But rather his neighbor's. Eat anything that is sold in the meat market without raising any question about it on the grounds of conscience. For the earth and everything is the Lord's. If a believer invites you to his house and you wish to go, eat whatever is set before you, raising no questions on the grounds of conscience. However, if someone says, this was offered to us as a sacrifice, don't eat it, both out of consideration for this one who told you and also for the sake of conscience. I mean, of course, his conscience, not yours. For why should my freedom be determined by someone else's conscience? If I eat with thankfulness, why should I be denounced because of what I am thankful for? What he's saying is simple. You go to the meat market where they would sell, they would go and sell the meat that was sacrificed to the idols. Don't worry about it. You're not going personally to go worship that demon. So it's not an effect to you. If you go over to somebody's house and they have purchased this meat and they have it set before you, don't worry about it. You're not worshiping the demon. Now, if they come up to you and they say, now I want to warn you, this has been sacrificed to idols, he's either looking out for you or he's proud of it, seeing if he's going to mess you up. And in either event, you say, no, I'll eat something else, thank you. Because you're looking out for his conscience and you're not trying to fall into a trap. It's straightforward. It's simple. He says, whatever it is, you're simply trying to be a good influence and a builder of believers around you. Beyond that, don't worry about it. Be at peace. Simply follow God's word and your conscience, and don't let the devil beat you over the head. Therefore, verse 31, whatever you eat or drink, whatever you do, do everything for the glory of God. Don't become a stumbling block to Jews or Greeks or to the church of God, just as I myself try to please everyone in every way. I don't look at my own benefit, but rather for the benefit of my people, so that they might be saved. It's real easy to say, but boy, is it hard to live out. Particularly in our day and time when everything can be taken a short little clip of something, or a picture can be taken of something and take it right out of context, put it all over Facebook, and then, boy, what a mess you got then. It's easy to say, but it's harder to live. Remember back in chapter 8, verse 12, Paul said, if you sin in this way against your weaker brother, who have you sinned against? Jesus. So stand accordingly. How do we know what we ought to do with our freedom? How do we know if we should do something or shouldn't do something? Well, out of our passage, I have a few questions that I pulled from it that we could ask ourselves. Is it helpful to myself or others? That's essentially what he said in verse 3. You go to do something, you're questioning something, a gray area, a conscience area. Is it helpful to myself or others? Does it build myself up and others? Verse 23 as well. Is it a stumbling block for me or others? Verse 29. Can I do this thanking God for it? Verse 30. And verse 31, does it bring glory to God? There is so much that we claim that we need in our life when really we don't. We have a lot of fluff, especially in our America. There's so much that we could cut out that would benefit our lives and the lives of others. But we don't do it because we claim it's a need. What are we doing or keeping in our lives that's a hindrance to us or others in following God? John Wesley said that I learned more about Christianity from my mother than from all of the theologians in England. She had a definition that I have before you of what sin is, and man, it's a fantastic quote to leave with your kids. Whatever weakens your reason, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, takes off your relish for spiritual things, and she's not talking about pickles there. Whatever increases the authority of the body over the mind, that thing is sin to you, however innocent it may seem in itself. Man, that's a good definition of sin. Oh, if I could teach my kids that. But you know what? In teaching my kids that, how you first do it is by living it yourself. Boy, that's the rub, isn't it? Lord, help us stay away from these traps placed by the enemy. In conclusion, I want to take us back to verses 12 through 14. At the close, I always like to give us something that we can apply from the passage that we read. And much actually, he mentions it in verse 15. He says, apply what you read. In that, when I was studying these 4 verses, 3 verses, 12 through 14, I saw something that I had never seen in the same way before. And so I decided that I'd kind of breeze through it, but then I wanted to go back and apply it. So verse 12 says, therefore, whoever thinks he is standing secure should watch out so he doesn't fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is unusual for human beings, but God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond your strength. Instead, along with the temptation, he will also provide a way out so that you may be able to endure it. And so, my dear friends, keep on running from idolatry. How many temptations would you say that you have in a day? Go back, Daniel. They're not supposed to see that yet. How many temptations do you think you face? Now, what I've done is just to make it easy. I'm bad at math, but to make it easy, I did a round number. These temptations, they don't have to be like, go out and murder somebody, but they may go out and say, ignore that person. Don't talk to that person. Act out in pride. You don't have to steal a car, but maybe a pack of gum. How many temptations do you think that you face in a day? Now, what I've done just for easy math is I've said 10. I'm sure some of you awful sinful people that are trying to ride the bull, much less, stay in the danger area of the field, may have more. And some of you that are trying to stay away as far away from that fence line as you can, you might have less in a day. But let's just say on average 10. Now, as we read in verse 13, every single temptation, God does what? Makes a way of escape. That's pretty cool. So if you, on average, have 10 temptations a day, God, every time you have a temptation, makes a plan. And I say a, and that's correct. That's incorrect. Because it says, with the temptation will also provide a way out. That's not actually the wording. It's the way out. God provides a direct, perfect plan so that you don't have to fall to the temptation. So if you just on average, again, just for number's sake, you have 10, that means that 10 times a day, God is making a plan intervening for you. That's pretty cool. How about a week? If the average is 10 temptations a day, that's 70 in a week, isn't it? A month, if you divide out how many months you have in a year, etc., He's intervened in your temptations 304 plus times. God intervening for you. Making a plan so that you can defeat the temptation. A year, 3,600. 10 years, it's 36,000. And as I was going through it, I wanted to make it personal. I've been a Christian for about 25 years. So I did the math, and that's 91,250 times that God has intervened in my life so that I don't fall to temptation in my Christian walk. Satan would tell us that God doesn't care about what you're going through. Satan would say that God just sends you out there and good luck, you're on your own. That's a lie. There is no one in your life that has ever intervened more in your life for you to be successful and make it than God himself. And we're just talking about the times when he has made a plan for your escape and temptation. We're not even talking about what Jesus did on the cross. We're not talking about all of the information that the scripture gives us to miss it. We're just talking about the times when God makes a plan and says, this is the way, walk in it, and you're going to miss the temptation. Now, I know that you can fudge the numbers, they go up and down, but you get what I'm saying. Satan's a liar. God is intricately involved in your life on a daily basis. That's a beautiful thing. Now, instead of just doing it personally, if we say that, just for easy numbers, we have 50 that attend our church. I know it's actually more than that. But when people are traveling and all, we'll just say 50 to make it easy numbers. That means God intervenes for our church 500 times a day. And we got a little church, y'all. In a year, that's 182,500 times that God makes a way when there is no way. As of February 22, the Church of the Nazarene has 2,666,845 members, and I'm sure it's a lot more than that now. But in our denomination, that means in the last year, if you just do those average numbers of 10 temptations a day, God has made a way where there is no way 9.7 plus billion times just for our denomination alone. Tell me how God's not working for us. Tell me how God doesn't care about us. He wants you to win. He has provided a way every single time that when you come to a temptation, you can bear it. Don't believe the lie. God's not only at work, but he wins. We can't understand his ways because they're far above our own. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9 says, but we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. So whatever you're going through individually, or what we're going through as a world corporately, we can know that God is at work for our good. Every single day. Every single temptation. I want to give a paraphrase of verses 12, 13, and 14. And this is my own wording, but I'll take it as that. Be alert. Just because you think you're safe, that's the most likely time the enemy will attack. But don't worry. God is already making a way of escape for you personally. He loves you and he doesn't want to see you fail. So when the attack comes, start looking for the exit. And when you find the exit, stop fighting, stop deliberating with the problem, and head for the door. And you will win over the temptation. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.